Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We're at episode 34, and on today's episode, I speak with Jessie Cunniffe of book Blurb Magic. Again, this time Jessie dissects two book blurbs submitted by volunteers. One, a women's fiction take, and the other, a spicy romance read. We talked about what worked in each blurb, what authors should keep in mind, and details to include in your own book blurb. The women's fiction blurb came from friend of the podcast and author Kimberly Packard, and is from her upcoming novel, This Time Around. The spicy romance blurb came from author Liz Crowe and her sizzling book, Floor Time, Stewart, Realty, Book 1. There's a companion YouTube video with this episode where Jessie shows notes and walks through the changes. The link to the video will be in the show notes. Highly recommend if you are a visual learner like me. As mentioned, Jessie has been a guest on the podcast before, and we had an amazing discussion on episode 25, talking book blurb do's and don'ts. If you're looking to learn more about book blurb writing, be sure to give the episode a listen. Finally, Jessie provides book blurb services and programs to make writing blurbs easier than ever for authors. If you're interested, links to the services and programs can be found in the show notes. And you can use the discount code of Romance the Story for 10% off. With that said, let's jump right in. Today we have a second-time guest. Welcome professional book blurb coach and creator of book Blurb Magic, Jessie Cunniffe. Yay!
Hi, Sarah. So nice to be back. I'm excited for this episode.
I know. Oh, I've been looking forward to this one a lot. Now, you've been on the show before, obviously, but can we hear a little bit about your book blurb business again? Any updates since we last talked?
Yeah, well, I have a whole new service now. So one of the things that I was getting asked about a lot was, can you just look at my blurb and help me fix it? And if you're in the book Blurb Magic course, then in exchange for your honest feedback, I always give one free critique. But people were like, I want a critique for my second and third and fourth blurb, which is fantastic. And I know it can be really reassuring to have that kind of second set of eyes on it. So I've updated a couple of things. So inside Book Blurb Magic in the bonuses section, there are now 2 critique options. They're very affordable, like $20 and $30. So tier 1, you get a voice memo from me talking through the strengths and weaknesses of your blurb and a few suggestions for what I'd tweak. And if you want something more involved, you can also get the tier 2 critique, which is basically kind of like what we're going to do today, a screen share video of me talking through your blurb, making edits in real time. And I send you that video, and I also send you the document with my tracked changes. So if you're in the Book Blurb Magic course, they are in there in the bonuses. You can access those straight away. If you are not in BBM or you want a more high touch experience, last month I opened up the one-to-one Blurb Audit, which has been so much fun because I just love talking to people face to face. And I don't think I was cut out to be a solopreneur. I like to talk to people. So in the one-to-one Blurb Audit, you basically just send me your blurb, and it doesn't have to be one that you've written. It can be a blurb that someone else wrote for your book and you're like, I want to fix this, but you do have to be interested in fixing it and putting in some legwork because it's a real collaborative experience. So I send over initial edits, then we hop on a Zoom call together for 30 minutes and brainstorm rewrites. You can ask me any questions you want to, and then you go away and do the rewriting process. You have unlimited access to me on Voxer for the duration, so you can voice note me or text me, and then I will give your blurb a final pass. So if you use the code Romance the Story, you get 10% off Book Blurb Magic, 10% off the one-to-one Blurb Audit. Or if you decide in the middle of the Blurb Audit that you're like, you know what, actually, Jessie, I don't want to do this, you can have it. Then you can just upgrade to the custom book blurb. And Romance the Story will get you 10% off that as well. So lots of fun things, lots of options, basically. I wanted to try and cover all bases of all stages of the blurb writing process. And I know that being an author can be kind of lonely, especially if you're self-publishing. And it's just helpful to be able to say, here's my blurb. Is it okay? What should we do? And I love critiquing blurbs. It's so fun. That's why I'm back here for a second time.
Well, and I appreciate that you have all these really great options because, like you said, there are different types of stages of it. Like you said, sometimes I've heard of people who said like, yeah, I went through 3 different blurb writers until,
Oh yeah.
I found a really good one or I found the blurb that worked for me and I'm very visual. So I love fact that you have something that people can actually talk to you and have a visual piece to it. Because that is, for some reason, it just clicks in my brain when I see it visually.
And I love getting that instant feedback from the author as well. I've done a couple of live workshops now as well. And it's really nice to be like, oh, what were you thinking when you wrote this line? That sounded really, really snarky, didn't it? I didn't mean it like that. But I just, like, what was going through your head? Talk me through it. I'm always very nice. I think it's really important in critiques to look at what is working well with the blurb as well. So if you ever come to me for a critique, it's not like I'm going to be like, this is bad and this needs to change and this is rubbish. It's always like, you know what? This is working really well. Next time you write a blurb, you should also do this, because I am really passionate about helping authors to learn the craft of blurb writing if that's something that they want to do. Totally here for the people who are like, nope, don't want to do it. I'm like that with my taxes. I'm like, no, nothing is going to make me interested in doing my taxes. So if nothing's going to interest you in writing you a blurb, then that's fine. But yeah, that's why I sort of created the one-to-one blurb audit package and that opportunity to work with me one-on-one, because I know that there are some authors out there who really want to kind of like level up their blurb craft and like have that conversation and be like, what am I doing well? What needs to change? And learn from that whole process of the rewrite.
Like, we received a couple of example blurbs to kind of go through today, and there are some really great pieces to those blurbs. So I asked listeners a couple of months ago if they would be willing to provide examples of blurbs that we could dissect and really get into for today's episode. Examples are super helpful for me, and being able to identify what worked and what could use a little tweak for a real example is like a great tool, like to show what's working for a blurb. We received 2 volunteer blurbs, one for women's fiction and one for a spicy romance. Which one would you like to start with?
I'm going to start with the women's fiction one, because we'll start with like that one's the more standard book blurb formula, I guess. Both of them, I think it's important to note, are written in third-person POV. The women's fiction one was a first-person POV book. Remember that you can always write a blurb in third person. It doesn't matter what point of view your actual book is in. You can always write a third person blurb. First person blurbs are only if your book is in first person, and they are trickier to write. So we're just going to go through 2 third person blurbs today and have a chat about them. I will share my screen for those of you watching the video. Okay, so I'll read through this blurb. Now, I usually in a blurb audit obviously have direct access to the author and we're like chatting through it. So some of the suggestions I'll make will be kind of like educated guesses, but hopefully it will give you an idea of things to look out for and ways to change things. So let's get into this blurb. So the hook is, if you could go back in time and do it all over again, would you make the same choices, the same mistakes? Josie Gardner's life centered around 2 things: her amazing children and her burgeoning business. But when both are at risk of slipping through her fingers, a panic attack releases her grip on reality and the present. She wakes up in her teenage bedroom nearly 30 years into the past, where she is forced to relive her senior year of high school. Determined to get back to her own time, Josie makes a list of mistakes she has to fix this time around, hoping one will send her back to the present. But when faced with one choice from her past, to pursue her high school crush, Josie faces the real possibility of losing her children for good. First up, one of my favorite things about doing blurb critiques is just all the awesome stories that I hear. Like, if I do like a 2-hour workshop, within that time, there's like 8 different stories. And I'm like, guys, brains amaze me. I love this. It's giving me like Suddenly 30 vibes, but in reverse, and it's so fun. So I'm going to flick over to where I've kind of butchered it a little bit. And I'm going to walk you through everything that I've done. My first instinct looking at this blurb is that it was too short. And when I checked the word count, it was 148 words, which is in some ways super impressive. We want a blurb to sit somewhere between 150 words to 200. But often I find that 150 is the minimum. And if you're going below that, it usually means we're missing a few details. So the kind of sweet spot, I've actually bumped this one up to roughly, I think, about 190. So, and we just wanted a few more details. So my first feeling with this one was that the hook is just a little bit too long. Takes a little bit too long to get immersed in. And while I love the use of questions are a fantastic way to get your reader involved in your blurb super quickly. This question takes a little while to get to the part where the reader is asking themselves, would they make the same choices? And because the first part of it is, if you could go back in time, that's the kind of generic sort of phrase that we hear quite a bit. And it doesn't necessarily indicate strongly enough that we're going to get asked a question. So it could theoretically be easy for a reader to tune out. And best case scenario, they're going to have to commit to a long sentence to get to the bit that hooks them. So my suggestion for this, and this is like, again, I'm just spitballing and throwing stuff out here, but I've suggested, would you take a second chance to have it all, even if it meant losing everything else? Or it could be everything you've loved or everything you've worked for. But what I'm doing here is juxtaposing kind of two concepts. So would you take a second chance? And actually that means losing everything. So that nice little contrast is always a great thing to do in hooks. But also I get to the question much quicker because I'm starting with, would you take a second chance? And the reader's instantly like, a second chance to do what? So in just sort of, 1, 2, 3, 6 words instead of maybe like 8 or 9, have got to that question and have the reader going, oh, I don't know, would I take a second chance? And then hinting that actually the second chance has a rather big caveat, which is the crux of this story, right? If she chooses a different path, she loses her kids and her business and this life that she's built up. So that would be my first suggestion for the hook, and it would be something that, you know, you could play around with, but just cutting through to the actual essence of the story. It is also important, and this is not something this author has done incorrectly, but I like to mention it anyway. It's important to note that your hook shouldn't be conveying any crucial information. It should be capturing the essence of your story in a way that evokes curiosity. Don't use your hook to introduce any names or places or key events. We've got to think of the hook as almost totally separate from the blurb. They should be able to work completely independently, which is something that this author nailed. That's great.
Well, and that's what I kind of loved with what you kind of redid with this, with kind of that opening question, because it's kind of the story promise that you've kind of recontextualized, but made it like I am immediately hooked in there and just like, ooh, I want to keep reading.
Why will I lose everything?
Exactly. And then I loved the original, kind of what she originally wrote, but like you said, it was taking a little long to kind of, I know my brain kind of tripped over the 2 questions back to back.
Exactly. And you don't want, and this is the kind of, you know, scary and also exciting thing about blurbs, is the goal is to make sure the reader can't trip. Like, you have to make this the smoothest reading experience they are ever going to have in their life. If you have to retake on any of those sentences, you've got to assume that you might lose them. And I know that sounds really brutal. It sounds like a lot of pressure, but it also just means you can really kind of enjoy yourself in crafting really beautiful sentences. I think sometimes we sort of stress about trying to cram everything in and kind of forget that it's just about writing like beautiful sentences that are easy to read. And as one of my Instagram followers pointed out, writers actually write hooks all the time. The first sentence of your first chapter, like, I'm going to willing to bet you slaved over that. The first sentence of any chapter, the last sentence of a cliffhanger chapter, like, they're all hooks. We actually do this all the time. And I was kind of mind blown when my follower said that. I was like, oh my God, you're right. Because it's just a different context. So, you know, authors are actually well practiced at doing these kind of things. And as you say, it's got to encapsulate the story promise and recontextualize it or rephrase it in a way that's going to snag people in. I will say, looking at this blurb straight away, I can see that the structure is really good. So I can see that we've got a setup paragraph, we've got an inciting incident, and we're raising the stakes. That is done really well, which is, you know, a big part of what I look at when I'm looking at a blurb going, right, do we do an audit or do we start again from scratch? If the structure is there, then we can work with it. So that is a really, really promising thing. Shall we move on to the first paragraph?
Sure.
So my first thing that I tweaked is I changed centered for centers, because we want to stick with present tense for our blurbs. It just kind of situates our reader more immediately in the story. So I've said Josie Gardner's life centers around 2 things: her amazing children, etc., etc. Now, for the most part, this paragraph is great. It's a really nice quick setup. It tells us everything we need to know. My question was, when both are at risk of slipping through her fingers, that could mean anything from the fact she's like a super controlling person who just doesn't want her kids to grow up, or like a nasty ex who's literally like taking her children away from her, or, you know, someone who's got it in for her business. Like, there's too much scope within that statement for us to care enough or like know the seriousness of the situation. I love the second bit of that sentence. I love panic attack releases her grip on reality and the present. Awesome. Love that so much. But I think just before that, we need a little bit of detail that tells us exactly what the risk is. And that's not going to be a spoiler because this is happening in the first act of your story. That is all like, free to use for your blurb. I'm not saying we need a whole extra sentence. I still want this to just be one sentence, ideally. But I would like to know just very quickly what's threatening her kids, what's threatening her business, because then we know exactly what she stands to lose and how. And chances are, like, let's say if it is an ex coming back and there's a custody battle, that's something that's also relatable to people. People either know someone who's been through that or been through it themselves, or, can just picture it. Whereas when we say both are at risk of slipping through our fingers, it's like, well, how? And how bad is it? I want to know how bad it is. I want to know exactly how bad it is. So that would be my main suggestion for that paragraph. How do you feel about that, Sarah? Is that something that occurred to you?
Yeah, because I was, the moment you said it, I'm like, oh, I know this story. I've actually read parts of it. So I knew exactly what she was talking about. But the fact that you didn't, tells me like, oh, that makes sense. Someone who's reading it might just seem too vague for them. But you did mention, because we don't want to give too much away in the story, but something that happens in the first act is okay to mention.
I don't like to go by hard and fast rules. I've heard people say like the first 50 pages. I'm like, well, if you've written in a novella, that's most of your story. And if you've written a 50,000 word thing, they're like, it's going to be different again. So I don't like to go by hard and fast rules, but generally speaking, things that are happening in the first act are okay to reveal. I always take it on a case by case basis. But my feeling here would be, are you able to tell us why it's slipping through her fingers? Can you shed light on that? I'm curious now.
Yes. Her and her husband are separated. They're going through a divorce.
How is that threatening her business, or is it not her business that's threatened? It does say both are at risk.
Her business is not threatened. It's actually doing great, but I think she's kind of going through a midlife crisis. Or at least that isn't immediately clear of how her business is threatened, but it's more of the trajectory of her life that if she changes, she won't have the business probably.
So, and that immediately gives me so much more information. I'm like, well, then we shouldn't be saying both are at risk, because that just makes it sound like she's going to lose her kids and she's going to lose her business. And that sounds like maybe that's not the story. So maybe it's that, when divorce proceedings take a turn for the worse, she starts losing her grip on reality. It threatens. I think we need to get something in here about it threatening this really lovely life that she's made for herself. It sounds like she's clearly happy. She's got 2 amazing children. She has a business that's doing really well. So I think what we really need to drive home here is that it's not just threatening one thing. It's actually threatening this whole thing that she's built up. And that then makes sense to us, like, whoa, okay, well then obviously you lose your grip on reality, like 100%. I can see that crisis happening. So that would be my main feedback for the first paragraph. Is it a huge crime to leave it like that? Not at all. But we're just looking at ways to make this, to really sell that story. To me, that's underselling the story by not giving us that detail there. Now, interestingly, so this second paragraph where we jump into the inciting incident where she wakes up in her teenage bedroom, 30 years in the past. So the original paragraph just started with she wakes up in her teenage bedroom. And that's instantly a kind of no-go for me if we flick over to the original and imagine that we're skimming through. So you've got to assume that readers are not going to read your blurb in order all the way through. So if I jump from here to here and just start with she wakes up in her teenage bedroom, I'm going to go who, how, what, where's the context, right? If I change it to when Josie wakes up in her teenage bedroom 30 years in the past, we instantly have some context, even if we've skipped this first paragraph. So a rule that I like to make when I'm writing a blurb is that every paragraph should kind of make sense if you started there. Now, it's not going to make perfect sense. There's obviously details they're going to miss if they don't read your first paragraph. But the very beginning sentence, like if they were to just start reading, like if I started at paragraph 2, I'd still be interested because it's like, oh, Josie wakes up in her teenage bedroom 30 years in the past. That's interesting. But if it just says she wakes up in her teenage bedroom, I'm like, I don't know who. it's a really little thing, but I find that it's really effective in catching readers, because that could be the difference between someone who then gets hooked into that second paragraph and ends up reading the rest of your blurb, or who goes, I don't know what's going on here, I'm just going to click next. So it's all these tiny little things that we're trying to kind of, you're trying to be really clingy to the reader. Like, please don't go. This is a great paragraph. Read it. So that might seem like a really arbitrary change, but that's the very specific reason for doing it. Now, this paragraph also jumped out at me as a little bit too short. I got rid of things like nearly 30 years in the past, just because I felt like that detail was cluttering up the page. It's fine to just say 30 years. We don't need to be super specific about it. Unless, of course, as the author, you have a huge problem with that. And like, if it's really important that it's only nearly 30 years, then by all means keep it in. But as a sort of blurb writer, just reading that, I was like, you know what? I think we can just say 30 years. That's fine. What I wanted to know from this paragraph is, what is the significance of her senior year of high school? And I don't mean that I need to know the spoiler, but I've suggested here the year that ... I don't know, is it like the year that broke her, or the year that, she had the biggest regret of her life? Or we just need to know why that might be significant. Obviously, I'm assuming that there is some, perhaps like spoiler, some big reason as to why she had to relive that year. So I'm not asking for that here. But from Josie's point of view, like when she thinks back on her senior year of high school, is she like, oh God, that's the year that, I almost kissed so-and-so, or, the year I gave up on blah. I think that just qualifies and makes much more interesting to know that she's gone back to that year. And so that would also then just flesh out that paragraph just a tiny bit more, and it just to look a little bit healthier to me in terms of the level of detail that we have there. Not that there's anything wrong with short paragraphs in blurbs, but occasionally, and especially in third person POV blurbs, we tend to stick to a more conventional paragraph length. First person POV, totally different rules. That's a whole other podcast episode.
You kind of got rid of we call them, I guess in my critique group, we used to call them junk words. But I like that you kind of condensed it down, made it really tight, and just kind of made it a lot more succinct. So that way, if I'm glazing over it, I get the gist.
Yeah, you want readers to get the gist as quickly as possible. And as authors, we kind of like very detail oriented, because you've just written a whole freaking book. And so the fact that it's nearly 30 years, you're like, duh, it's not actually 30 years, it's nearly. But is it important for the reader to know that? In some instances, it might be. In most instances, I would say it's not. And they're really, even if you leave the nearly in there, all I'm going to remember as a reader is 30 years. I'm not really going to remember the nearly. So yeah, I like the term junk words. It's like those little ones that sort of, to me, make the page look cluttered. And like I say, we are trying to make the blurb as easy as possible to read, like ridiculously easy. Last paragraph, I really enjoyed. I've made a few small changes just to try and get to kind of the crux of the motivations. So third paragraph starts, determined to get back to her own time. I'm more interested in kind of the motivation under that. So I've hazarded a guess at like determined to prove herself, or maybe it's determined to get back to the ones she loves. Of course, we kind of know that if we got stuck 30 years in the past, we'd be pretty keen to get back to our own time. So to me, that's not the most interesting thing. I would like to know what's going on inside of her. Like, why is it she wants to get back to her own time? And this could go, if it was a humorous book, you could go determined to, get home in time to make her kids dinner. Like you could have that level of detail if you wanted, right? I feel like that's probably not the tone of this book, but that is so much more, it gives us a lot more imagery than just determined to get back to her own time, because we all go, well, yeah, I probably would want to as well. Try to dig onto that, to the motivation. And I'm going to talk about motivation in the next blurb as well, because it's a really nice way to kind of get to the good stuff.
Well, and you did a great job, spot on, about like what the underlying motivation is. Cause like I said, I know the story. So like, yeah, That's basically it. She kind of is wanting to do these things she hasn't done, and then kind of, get back, go back, but she really wants to do the things she meant to do.
Like you might think you've written a rubbish blurb, but in actual fact, like I got that determined to prove herself from the way this blurb has been written. Like the author has actually steeped that in there somewhere. Like that's the feeling. The character's been portrayed strongly enough that was my first guess, that was my feeling. And I'm really glad that I was right, because it sort of confirmed my suspicion that actually there is a lot of good characterization in this blurb. It's just sometimes about actually stating it and using it rather than, I think as authors, we sometimes get into I just have to tell the story at this surface level. It's not a time for deep, emotion. And actually we do want to know the character motivations, and you can put those in there in a really small way that goes a long way, I feel. Because already for me, and I don't know how like you're reading it, Sarah, but I feel like Determined to Prove Herself instantly makes me relate to her more. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we all would, if we had a chance, go back, try to prove yourself in one way or another, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then I did like some very minor kind of clarity edits, in the hope that I've put one good deed. Good deed is not quite sitting right with me, but you sort of get the sentiment. I'm sure the author can sort of play with that and come up with something else, but we'll send her back to the present, because it's kind of like she's trying to get it right. So she's going to fix something, in the hope that like there's that one thing, that one piece of the jigsaw puzzle that will fall into place, and she'll be like, oh, I'm allowed to go back to the present now. And then again, to just get some more imagery. So initially we had, when faced with one choice from her past to pursue her high school crush, to me, I'm like, I want to know about the temptation. Like, is it that one moment where she didn't kiss him? Is it that one moment where she said no to going to prom with him? Is it like, what was that one moment where it could have gone either way? Because I feel like that is what she encounters, and stop me if I'm wrong, but I've done like a complete guess here. Like, and I've just said, when she's faced with the temptation from her past, and I've been like, 7 minutes in heaven with her high school crush, or what is it, playing spin the bottle, or saying yes to that kiss, like whatever it is, rather than just to pursue her high school crush. And to be honest, I actually would even go as far as naming the high school crush. I'd even be like, 7 minutes in heaven with Tommy Jones, the high school heartthrob, like whatever it is, I think let's personalize it and really kind of paint that picture for the reader of like I'm sure most of us can think back to our teens and be like, oh, there was that one person that I would have really loved if this happened. That's the moment she's encountering, and she's getting that chance to go back there. And I think most of us can relate with like, yeah, I really wish I'd just gone for it. So I would really like to know more about that moment. And I don't know if can you shed some light on that? Is there that moment in that book?
Yes, there is that moment with her high school crush. But would it be giving too much away if you stated it in the blurb, or no?
I don't think so, because it's like we don't know what she does for a start.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I think you don't have to go into like every gritty detail. Like I say, it could be saying yes to the prom date. Like we don't actually know too much from that.
That's true. And you can make it kind of vague, because I was thinking like saying it explicitly, but you could say like he takes a shot, or her high school, her high school crush, it takes a chance on her or something like that. Something a little more vague, but
to say yes when her high school crush takes a chance on her. That would be great. Yes. That would be great. So I think I just wanted like a little bit more of imagery there. And then this last sentence about the real possibility of losing her children for good, like that's really hard hitting in one way, but I also feel like there's so much more at stake than, and this sounds terrible, than just her children. Of course, her children are incredibly important, but it is actually her whole life we're talking about. Like, yes, her kids are obviously incredibly important to her, but it's like, she's going through this divorce. She's made certain life choices, but she's made a go of it. And now, I think when we go through difficult things and we make a go of it, there's always that little thing in the back of our mind that's like, oh, what if, or could it have actually been better? And she's encountering that in a very real way, and getting the opportunity to make a choice between like, I'm going to choose the better option, or actually, you know what, I've made something of this and I'm proud of it and I love it. So I actually sort of was thinking that sentence almost felt a bit spoilery for me. Losing her children for good, even though you could take a pretty good guess at being like, well, then she'll lose everything. But I think it needs to be faced the real possibility of like losing the life she's built, or like, I just want something in there that I suppose is a little more general, but still really hard hitting. And I'd have to know more about the book to kind of give a possible line there. But essentially I wouldn't focus on the children. I think the focus has to be like, she will lose everything, and maybe that's a bad thing, because even though she's dealt with a whole lot of rubbish situations, what she actually has is great. And that would then sort of hark back to the hook, right, where we've got would you take a second chance, even if it meant losing everything? So that's where I sort of wanted that paragraph to end up. And I think it would just, hit home a little bit more. It's funny, so much of the time with blurbs, it's about the right details. I realize I've been like, it needs more detail. And then I'm like, cut that detail out. It's about the right details. And I hope that you and your listeners can kind of hear the choices that I'm making as I go through and how they kind of stack up against each other. The last thing I was going to say with this blurb is that I really wanted a final like punchline at the end. Like that is a really strong ending to that paragraph, but I actually think we could sort of reinforce things. And also for our skim readers who might just go and hit the bottom line, it's almost like an end hook, if you will. And so I've kind of done something like, most of us would kill for a do-over of our teenage years, but what if our worst mistakes led to our happily ever afters? So I think that just kind of drives home the point of the whole story again, and somebody sort of skimming through the blurb can kind of get to that point and go, yep, this sounds like a great story. And of course, follow it with a call to action. If you're on Amazon or whatever, scroll up, click buy now to blah, 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 blah. Never forget that we want to send readers somewhere once we get to the end of the blurb. But like I say, you'll notice that I actually haven't, and this is a really good sign, I haven't actually scrambled the order of this blurb at all. The structure is spot on. And that is something I teach in book Blurb Magic, and something that's just so important to get right. Because if you have the structure wrong, you're just going to be fighting against it the whole way. And if you've written your blurb, rewritten it like 20 times, chances are the structure is incorrect. So like, well done to this author for the structure, because honestly, I would say hopefully these suggestions have been helpful. And if they go away and have a play with it, it's just going to be a matter of like slotting those things in rather than, ripping the guts of it out and starting again.
No, and that's perfectly fair because it's very much structured a lot like her book is. So like it's a really, like we have like you said, the kind of the story promise, the inciting incident, a little bit of characterization in there, and then kind of that dark moment, or kind of like the third act kind of going into it, what's at risk, that buildup of what's at risk. And then you kind of end it with that nice question. I was going to ask, is it okay to start and end with a question? Is that okay? In a blurb?
I have no problem with it at all. Yeah. You could, if it bothered you, again, I think it's a bit of a personal preference. I don't think there's any, like the blurb gods are going to descend and be like, your book will not sell. But I see what you're saying. And if it bothered you, then I guess you could say, but maybe our worst mistakes lead to our happily ever afters. You could turn it into a statement instead of a question. So perfect. I think that one comes down more to personal preference. And I certainly wouldn't overdo the questions, especially if it's quite dramatic. If it's starting to feel like overkill, just change it into a statement.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, no, I was just curious because I do like that you kind of started and ended with a question. That was really cool. But I've seen a couple of blurbs out there where they do ask several questions within the blurb, but I want answers now.
Well, and that's the thing. And I think one reason I think this one works so well with two questions is because the main character is asking a lot of questions. She's being asked a question her whole entire life. And so you've got to consider the focus and the vibe of your book. I always come back to the vibe of the book. So I think in this specific instance, I personally feel it works really well. As you say, I wouldn't be asking questions outside of the hook or the punchline. Like there should not be questions in the body of the blurb, really. I've done it in first person POV blurbs, which again, whole other ball game. But in third person, it just trying to think of examples now. I'm sure, look, I always break my own rules sooner or later. So I'm sure there's one where I've done it and if it works, it works. That's the other thing. And I don't like to stick, if you've been through book Blurb Magic, there's like that framework and that formula, but there's room to move within it. And I've had so many students kind of like, break the rules once they know them, and then it works really well. I read blurbs in the bookstore that are getting more and more innovative every day. And I'm like, this is fantastic. It's becoming less formulaic, and that's a good thing. But yeah, if it works, it works. And you're a writer, like you can make those calls. I think so much of this second guessing comes from authors feeling like they don't have the authority to make a judgment call on their blurb. And I know sometimes it can feel really hard. And if you're way out of your comfort zone, like I say, that's what the blurb audit and whatnot is for. But don't be afraid to kind of just look at it as a writer and be like, is this a good piece of writing? Would I read this? Would I be interested in this? Because that's genuinely all it is.
Well, and I think you got the essence of the story down for sure, because I am familiar with the story. So I think you nailed it. I mean, I would definitely, I've read it anyway, but I'd read it again.
Fabulous. I'm so glad that, and that's my favorite part of the job, is actually just honing in and finding that one thing. Let's have a look at the spicy one. And this one is going to look totally different because I made far fewer markups, but it's kind of more conceptual things I want to talk about with this one, I guess, because lots of things about this blurb are really great, really fun, great turns of phrase. This author has fit a lot of information into a few words really well. So I have a lot of praise for this blurb, but then there's a few things that I think we could fix. So I'll read this one out and then we'll go through it. So our hook is, he's the king of giving orgasms. She's never come with a man. When wealthy playboy bachelor Jack meets Sarah post-quickie with a colleague in an empty condo, he realizes her drive and lust for life are a match for his. A much younger agent at his real estate brokerage, she is way off limits, but he can't get her out of his mind. And when Jack wants something, nothing will get in his way. One smoking hot illicit office hookup leads to plenty more risky liaisons at open houses and public places. Sex with Jack is a revelation, and Sarah can't resist the lure of orgasms on tap, even if she's joined to the Jack Gordon bedpost notching club at her brokerage, something she swore to avoid. They both insist it's a no-strings thing, nothing more than a fling. But when a tough property sale forces them to work together, they grow closer and closer. He's convinced it's destiny. Sarah's not so naive as to fall for a womanizer. Jack has until the sale goes through to close the toughest deal of his life, to convince Sarah they belong together. So much. I love how fun the language is in this. I love how spicy it is. This one is a third-person POV book, I believe, from memory. I love the setup paragraph. I love the development of this blurb. I actually mostly want to talk about the beginning and the end of it. So let's go up to our hook again. Hooks always cause problems. So on the face of it, like I really love the kind of sentiment and the contrast in this hook. But what we have here is actually two separate and fairly unrelated statements. So he's the king of giving orgasms. She's never come with a man. So you have two choices here. Either you rewrite the hook or you add a third statement that draws those two things together. So because, and that would be a standard sort of like, 3-sentence hook. So you've got a sentence about him, a sentence about her, and a sentence where you pull the two of them together. That's not always easy to do. I actually was writing a hook for a client last month, and I loved I knew it was going to be like a 3-sentence hook. I loved the first 2 sentences. She loved the first 2 sentences. We could not settle on a sentence that drew the two together. Sometimes it's almost impossible to draw together 2 sentences. Even if you're like, well, but that's my character and that's my character. Sometimes they don't actually meld really well. So if that's happening, I do want to say it's okay to let it go, because sometimes that's just what happens. I had an alternative hook for this, and it's not perfect, but you'll get the kind of gist, which is I've said she needs a specialist, he needs a challenge. Now, specialist is not a great word. This is something I've just kind of thrown off the top of my head. But what I'm getting at here is that I want to cut to the motivation behind this hook. So he's really experienced. She's very unsatisfied. The actual motivation here is like she needs someone who knows what he's doing. She needs an expert. Maybe it means she needs an expert. I don't know. And he's kind of up for the challenge. Like he loves this feisty woman who clearly is very enthusiastic in bed and loving their liaisons. So I think this hook personally would be more effective if we actually cut to the motivations below those two things rather than just stating the facts. Facts make for slightly boring hooks generally. Remember that a hook's job is not to relay important information. And I feel like this hook is kind of doing that, because if I didn't read that hook, if I skipped the hook, and depending on how your book covers format and all the rest of it, you might get someone who skips past that hook and just goes to the blurb proper. I'm actually not going to know that. All I'm going to know from reading the blurb is that, she can't resist him, which is fine. But I think it's a bit too factual, this hook. So I would go with something that cuts to the core of it, which is what each of them actually need. How does that feel for you? I'm curious as to your reaction after those two options.
I like, and I see where you're going, because like what they need, what each of them needs, like you said, she needs like an expert, he needs a challenge, and where they could both get that from each other, where they can find that within each other. I do like the hook, the original hook, but I do see where there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah. And so I think that hook could, like the original hook could actually work really well if we can get a third sentence that pulls it together.
Exactly.
And potentially has some kind of sexual innuendo in it, some kind of pun. There's lots of fun things. This is kind of like why I love spicy blurbs. There's so many fun things that you can do, so many puns. And I do love the the real estate kind of theme that we've got going through here with the final line in the blurb. That's brilliant. I love a good theme in a blurb. If you've got, I love writing firefighter blurbs because there's just so many fire related puns that you can do. Sparks fly, lighting fire, like it's super hot. Like it's hilarious. And you can go overboard. And obviously if your book's humorous, then you can have loads of fun. But it can be quite effective to have a little bit of themed language through there. Now, the setup paragraph of this blurb is awesome. I love that in the first sentence we learn that who Jack is, how he meets Sarah, and how he feels about her. So wealthy playboy bachelor Jack meets Sarah, post quickie with a colleague in an empty condo. He realizes her drive and lust for life are a match for his. Brilliant. I don't even know if it's a criticism, but my only comment on this would be that generally speaking, I like to introduce characters by their full name first name, last name. And when I'm doing that, I like to introduce one character in paragraph one character in paragraph two. However, with this one, I actually really like the kind of casual Jack meets Sarah. It's actually working for me. So in this instance, I probably wouldn't change it. I quite like it. And I think it suits the spontaneous nature of their relationship, I feel. It's just kind of like it keeps it casual, which is what this whole story is kind of about, right? They're trying to keep it casual. So actually, I think it actually works. Generally speaking, I would go, first name, last name, but I think it's working here. So I'm okay with that.
I was thinking, well, it kind of matches their encounter. Like it sounds like post quickie with a colleague in an empty condo. So like maybe they just didn't have time to get each other's last names, or maybe they're just like, let's go for it. So
exactly. And this is, again, why I don't like to be too finicky about rules. Because, if you asked me, hey, Jessie, how do you normally introduce a character? I'd be like, make sure it's first name, last name the first time we hear from them, and first name only after that. But this works perfectly for this blurb. So I don't have a problem with it at all. It totally, again, fits the vibe. You want your blurb to fit the vibe of your book. The only thing I changed about the first paragraph was I inserted a line break. So I put this, and when Jack wants something, nothing will get in his way. I actually made that a new line, and that's partially to emphasize that line, because I just thought that was a really sexy, significant line. It's like, he's not going to let up until he gets what he wants. And also it's very skimmer friendly. So even if I don't really know, even if I sort of jumped down, I might see, in fact, when I kind of look at this blurb, just first off, I might see the hook, and then I might also see when Jack wants something, nothing will get in his way. And like that instantly gives me like a feeling about what kind of main character he is. And if I'm a romance author looking for men like that in my books, I'm like, yeah, let me go back and read that first paragraph. I want to know who this guy is. So kind of just helps it stand out a bit. Love that. I suppose it was the second paragraph. I've kind of made it the third now. That it sort of tells us about how that one hookup leads to plenty more, that it's risky, that it's at open houses and public places. I love the sentence, sex with Jack is a revelation and Sarah can't resist the lure of orgasms on tap. That's just so great. It just tells us everything we need to know about her experience of it. And I also like this detail about, even if she's joined the Jack Gordon bedpost notching club, I will say I think that's a little bit wordy. I'd probably say something like, even if she's now another notch on the Jack Gordon bedpost, something she swore to avoid. I'd probably go for something a little bit tighter like that, because I will admit, as a reader, when I first read that, I was like, Jack Gordon bedpost notching club. Oh goodness, okay, that's really long. And then went, oh, and also we haven't heard his last name before. So that's an extra thing to process. So I actually would say, even if she's now another notch on the Jack Gordon bedpost, something she swore to avoid. The only problem with that is it doesn't kind of indicate that, it sort of sounds like he's sleeping around with other people at the brokerage. So look, I mean, I don't think it's a crime of a sentence. I will say it made me stumble a little bit. So if there's a way to tighten it up, I would suggest that the author do that. But it's fun and it really tells us what we need to know.
Exactly. And I'm with you kind of a little bit on that one, because I loved the whole paragraph. And then, but when I read that, even if she's joined the Jack Gordon bedpost notching club at her brokerage, man, I get tripped up over reading now saying out loud. But I saw Gordon, because I guess my eyes just caught on that word and said, same. Who's Gordon? That was my initial reaction. So,
and so if you like, because if we said, even if she's now another notch on the Jack Gordon bedpost, we wouldn't have to capitalize bedpost. I think it's the capitalizations that then Gordon pops out at us because it's the only name we haven't seen so far, because everything's capitalized. But if we just said the Jack Gordon bedpost and bedpost wasn't capitalized, our eye's going to see that differently. We're like, oh yeah, Jack Gordon. Okay, that's him. Yeah. So I think just it would be easier to process that information. So that would be, it's funny, the little nitpicky things you get hung up on in blurbs, but that's something that I would be looking to just shift slightly.
But it also leads back to the skimming part, because our brain automatically processes those things, like you said, because we think it's a proper name or a proper title of some sort when you say Jack Gordon bedpost notching club. But then if we just fix those just quick capitalizations, our eyes would probably glaze over it a little easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that would be the only thing I would change in that paragraph. Otherwise, it's really, really fun. Where this blurb kind of fell flat for me was the last paragraph. And the exact reason why is that we've had all this fabulous imagery, and we've heard a lot about how the characters are feeling in these first few paragraphs. And then third paragraph, flip the switch, and all of a sudden we're just being told how things are. So they both insist it's a no strings thing, nothing more than a fling. But when a tough property sale forces them to work together, they grow closer and closer. And this often happens. I can sort of almost hear the author panicking, going, okay, I've got to get all the rest of the details into this last paragraph. Go, 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 go. And we lose that immersive sort of feeling. So there's a few ways to kind of go with this paragraph, but I want to know, so it says they both insist it's a no strings thing, but I want to know what's actually going on. So who said it first? Who said it's a no strings thing first? Who's more insistent about it? It sounds to me like it might be Sarah, because she's like, he's a womanizer. Nuh-uh, not happening. But I actually think, so we've finished with Sarah in that previous paragraph. So the last thing we've sort of read is something she swore to avoid. I think we could start the final paragraph with, Sarah is insistent this is nothing more than a fling, or Sarah is not letting this be any more than a fling. Like I really want to hear sort of from her. And then I think, I've sort of suggested a little reword, with the Sarah's not so naive as to fall for a womanizer, but Jack is proving very persuasive. Like I feel like we need that sentiment in there more so than anything else. We know how they are feeling, but it can't last, or, even something, I don't know how she feels as a character, but I'm getting the feeling that maybe she's like, you can't have good sex and like a proper relationship. Like what? They don't come together. Like no pun intended there, but it's, I feel like there's something in there that we could explore a little bit more in terms of, I want to hear it from the character's point of view, because we've already heard, Jack realizes her drive and lust for life are a match for his. Sex with Jack is a revelation. She swore to avoid the bedpost. Like we're hearing so much stuff from the character's point of view, and then this paragraph is like the author talking rather than the characters. So I want to get back into the characters' heads in this paragraph. I think the information in the paragraph is spot on. Like you were telling us what we need to know. That's brilliant. And again, the structure of this blurb is awesome. I'm really kind of privately hoping both of these people used my free cheat sheet, because I'm like, this looks like my structure. I'm hoping that's the case. But yeah, and so I think the information in here is perfect, but we want the characters' voices. The other thing that I don't love is, when a tough property sale forces them to work together, they grow closer and closer. Closer and closer is like the most platonic kind of sounding thing in this whole blurb, and it's just not it's not capturing the fun that I've had earlier in this blurb. So I want to hear something about they can't stop the sparks flying, or that, it's getting harder to ignore something like, such feelings. Like I want something more visceral in there. I want something sexier. And I understand that they're also obviously like catching feels. So, give us a little bit of an insight into how that is actually feeling for them, and more show, less tell.
It seems like we got a good flow going. Then all of a sudden we kind of put the brakes just slightly on, just as we get to the third paragraph, because you're right. It kind of like, I want more stakes, or a little bit more of how they're growing. What are they doing together?
I want to feel that tension.
Yes.
Like, they're both in this, like having really hot sex, but being like, no, this is going to end soon. And then have this opportunity to find out more about each other. Like maybe it's that when a tough property sale forced them to work together, Sarah sees a different side to Jack, or Sarah, I just want to hear more of that kind of revelation, I guess, happening. And the other tricky thing is that we need to hear it for both of them. So we've got Sarah's not so naive as to fall for a womanizer. But the final sentence of this blurb, which I'm so torn because I love it. Like Jack has until the sale goes through to close the toughest deal of his life to convince Sarah they belong together. I kind of love that. But at the same time, I think I've written in the comment here, like this is only from Jack's point of view. Like what are Sarah's stakes, and can we draw them together somehow? And this is a pretty common thing that happens with romance blurbs, because you come up with a killer sentence like that and you're like, done. But in actual fact, it's not actually capturing both sides of the story. And we really need both sides of the story, whether they're each a separate sentence. Because the other thing that isn't quite ringing true for me here is that we know that he's a playboy. So why is he suddenly convinced it's destiny, and he needs to convince Sarah they belong together? Like I actually need to go on a little bit more of a journey to believe that he gets there. So I need to hear like what he's seeing in her other than her body. Like what is it he's noticing about her? So that paragraph is really the only one that needs a kind of overhaul, and it's got a lot of the right information in there, just written from it's written from the narrator perspective rather than on the character's level. So I want to hear like the no strings thing. We definitely need to get that in there, but I want to hear who's saying that more. Like, is it, Sarah's convinced this is a no strings thing, but Jack is feeling XYZ. And then yes, tell us about the forced proximity situation, because that's like a plot detail we need to know, that they're forced to work together. But don't just tell us they go closer and closer. Like, give us a concrete thing, or something that someone notices, or a feeling that someone feels. And like, it sounds like Sarah has trust issues maybe as well. I don't know. So like maybe the stakes for her are like, no, she's not so naive as to fall for a womanizer, but like he's actually, maybe he is actually someone she can trust. Like I want to kind of get inside their heads more in this paragraph. And I feel, because the author did such a fantastic job of the first two paragraphs, that is going to be something they can do 100%. And I'd be really excited to see how it turns out, because it's such a fun blurb and it's such a great story. Again, I just love this. I love, one of my favorite things sometimes is talking to authors in an audit, and they'll be like, oh, because this happens in the story. And I'm like, hang on, that happens in the story and you haven't told me in the blurb. Like, we need that detail in there. Like, I feel like authors are just so modest about their stories. I love critiquing blurbs, because this is where we get the fun stuff, and we can be like, you know what, actually you get to brag a little bit, like, in a sense. It's like, this is your awesome story and you get to tease that detail or like amp up those feelings or whatever. Like, let's go for it. So yeah, I think this has been a really fun one. Both of them are really fun to go through, and really great contrasting examples, I think, of different challenges that could come up in the blurb writing process. And hopefully my chatting through them has given you guys some insight into the choices and the steps in evaluating what details need to go, what details need to stay, and how we word them.
Absolutely. And I love that we were able to, like you said, find the vibe, right? Really had different vibes of two different types of blurbs. And you were able to hone in on them really, really well and figure out exactly, where they needed to be just maybe tweaked just slightly, to really elevate that story. This spicy one in particular has been, I think this is a book that's already been out. She was just revising.
Yeah. And that is a fantastic thing to do. Like, it's always worth revisiting a blurb. I've spoken to multiple people who have had either, their sales tank or, skyrocket after changing a blurb, whether that's one that, I've had people go, oh, I paid for this really expensive blurb and actually my sales just tanked, and then I revised it and now they've, accelerated again. So I think never be afraid of looking at your blurb and go, you will know as an author, does this fit my book? Like, is it really capturing my book? And that's part of what I love about what I do, and why the audits are so fun, is that we get on that Zoom call and then I'll be like, does this feel right? And authors can tell me straight away whether something is right or not. They're like, yep, that fits the book, or nope, it doesn't. And we get through things so quick when we can sort of have that conversation and be like, this needs to change, that needs to change, this is actually this. And it's really important, I think, for a blurb to really accurately represent a book, because then people who love your blurb will love your book. And that just means better reviews and engagement overall, which is what we all want, right?
Exactly. That's what we want at the end of the day as writers. So where can listeners find you and connect?
I am always on Instagram. I love making reels, love making posts. So Instagram at Blurb Magic is the place where I hang out. At the link in my bio, there are all of my services. But if you want to drop me an email at any time, if you're not an Instagram person, Jessie at blurbmagic.com. If you want to send me your blurb and ask whether, I think you should do the blurb audit or just start again from scratch, I'm happy to take a look at that. I am offering that service for free, essentially, like a little free blurb assessment until the 1st of October, because that is when the blurb audit price is going up. So at the moment, if you buy a blurb audit today, tomorrow, up until the 1st of October, it's $67 US, and that is with the one-to-one Zoom call and the Boxer access and all the rest of it. It's going up to $97 on October the 1st, because I've only been doing them for about a month as like a tester, and I've realized exactly how much time and effort is going into them, and also that they are providing really fantastic results for people. We've expanded some of the offerings and things that you get inside that package. So it's basically being up-leveled on the 1st. If you purchase this week, you will get it for $67. And if you're not quite ready to send me your blurb, just shoot me an email after you've purchased and give me a heads up of when you want to send it over. You don't have to send it this week if you don't have it. And of course, use the code Romance the Story for 10% off that low price of $67. That'll also work on the custom book blurb service and the Book Blurb Magic course, depending on what you'd like to jump into. I am working on a full-blown website, but if you want to go to bookblurbmagic.com at the moment, it will take you to the sales page for the course. If you're confused in any way, just email me, Jessie at bookblurbmagic.com, and I will be able to help you out.
Thanks so much to Jessie for coming back to the show. Be sure to follow me on social media at Romance the Story. That way you can keep up with new and prior guests, as well as episodes to come. And if you're enjoying the content, please follow, share, or leave a review. It greatly helps the podcast. Book recommendations for this episode: Phoenix by Kimberly Packard, because this time around isn't quite ready for pre-orders. And Floor Time, Stewart Realty Book 1 by Liz Crowe. As always, be safe, stay well, and keep writing.